When billionaire Damien Cross saves a mysterious woman fleeing through Manhattan's streets, he has no idea she's an undercover FBI agent hunting his own family. What starts as a fake marriage arrangement becomes a deadly game of deception, betrayal, and forbidden love that will leave you speechless. Story time, fam, and this one is dripping with romance, secrets, and one unforgettable twist. Let's jump straight into it. Asterisk, the rain hammered against the bulletproof windows of the Bentley as it crawled through Manhattan's arteries, each drop exploding like tiny grenades against the glass. Inside, Damien Cross pressed his temple against the cool surface, watching the city blur into watercolor streaks of neon and shadow. His phone buzzed incessantly against his thigh, each vibration a reminder of the empire crumbling around him. "Sir, we're approaching the Meridian Hotel," his driver Marcus announced, glancing nervously in the rearview mirror.
What?
Damien didn't respond. Tomorrow, the Securities and Exchange Commission would announce their investigation into Cross Industries. By next week, his father's legacy would be reduced to headlines and congressional hearings. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd built his fortune on the very foundation his father had corrupted, brick by blood-soaked brick. The Bentley lurched to a sudden stop. Through the rain-streaked windshield, Damien glimpsed a figure stumbling. Between the stalled cars, weaving through traffic like a ghost fleeing hell itself, the passenger door ripped open with violent urgency. A woman threw herself inside, her dark hair plastered to her skull, emerald eyes wild with something between desperation and fury. She slammed the door and locked it, her chest heaving. As she pressed herself against the leather seat, "Drive," she gasped, not even looking at him. "Please, just drive." Damien stared at her, taking in the torn designer dress that had once been expensive, the bruises blooming purple along her collarbone, the way her hands trembled as she clutched a bloodied envelope to her chest. "This is a private vehicle," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of a man accustomed to being obeyed. She finally turned to face him, and the raw intelligence in her eyes hit him like a physical blow. "I know exactly who you are, Damien Cross, and right now, you're my only way out of this alive." Before he could respond, the hotel's front doors exploded outward. 3 men in black suits emerged, their movements predatory and synchronized. The woman's grip tightened on the envelope. "They killed my brother," she whispered, her voice breaking, on the last word, "and I'm the only one who knows why." The men spotted the Bentley. One of them reached inside his jacket. Damien's decision came from somewhere deeper than logic, from a place where guilt and redemption wrestled in the darkness of his conscience. "Marcus, drive." Now, as the car surged forward, the woman slumped against the seat, her defiance cracking, to reveal something vulnerable and shattered underneath. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet," Damien replied, studying her reflection in the window. "You might have just made the biggest mistake of your life." She turned to meet his gaze directly, and he saw something there that made his chest tighten. Recognition, not of his face, but of his pain. "My name is Sophia Reeves," she said, her voice steady, despite everything. "And I think you and I have more in common than you realize." The safe house sat perched on the Hudson River like a modernist sculpture, all glass and steel angles cutting through the storm. Damien had purchased it years ago under a shell company, one of many escape routes he'd prepared for the day his father's sins would finally surface. He never imagined he'd be sharing it with a stranger whose very presence seemed to electrify. The air around him, Sophia stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching lightning fracture the sky above Manhattan's skyline. She'd showered and changed into clothes Damien had provided, simple black sweater and jeans that somehow made her look more dangerous than the torn dress had. The envelope lay open on the marble kitchen island between them, its contents spread, like tarot cards predicting doom. "Your brother was investigating Cross Industries," Damien said, piecing together the documents. "These financial records show payments to offshore accounts, shell companies." He looked up at her. He was close to exposing everything. Sophia's reflection in the window showed no emotion, but her voice carried the weight of months of buried grief. Michael was a forensic accountant, specialized in following money trails that people thought they'd buried deep enough. She turned from the window, her green eyes reflecting the lightning. "He called me 3 days ago, said he'd found Something that would bring down one of the most powerful families in New York. He was excited, Damien. He thought he was going to be a hero. What happened? They made it look like a car accident. Her voice cracked slightly. Single vehicle collision on the FDR drive. But Michael was the most careful driver I knew, and there were no skid marks. She moved to the island, her fingers hovering over a photograph of bank transfers. They killed him for this. Damien studied the documents with growing horror. The payments led back to companies he recognized, 2 board members who'd sat at his father's table, would shake in his hand at charity galas while laundering money through construction contracts and city development deals. You could have taken this to the FBI, he said quietly. Why come to me? Sophia's laugh was bitter and sharp. Because you're the one person in this city who has as much to lose as I do. She moved closer, close enough that he could smell that rain still clinging to her hair. Your father built Cross Industries on blood money, and when this comes out, you'll lose everything. Your company, your reputation, your freedom. The truth of it hit him like cold water. You want my help bringing down my own family. I want justice for my brother. Her voice was steel wrapped in silk. And you want redemption for your father's crimes. We both know you've been looking for a way out of his shadow. Damien's phone buzzed. Text from his mother. Dinner tomorrow. The Piermont family is eager to meet you. Don't disappoint us again. He let out a long sigh. Isabella was the 5th woman his mother had tried to pair him with that month. He couldn't take another evening of forced smiles and dull conversations about family fortunes and summer vacations in the Mediterranean. Absurd, ridiculous, perfect. He turned to Ellie, who was watching him with a mix of curiosity and distrust. How much money do you want? Excuse me? Sophia raised an eyebrow. How much money do you want to pretend to be my wife? He asked, his tone as serious as if he were closing a multi-million-dollar deal. Sophia burst out laughing. You've got to be kidding me. Alexander's expression didn't waver. His piercing blue eyes remained locked on her. I don't joke about business. I'm offering you a roof over your head, a generous allowance and protection from whoever killed your brother. All you have to do is play along for a while. Sophia's laughter faded as she studied him. You're serious? Completely? She hesitated, biting her lip. This was insane, but then again, so was her life. Okay, fine. But I have a few conditions. Name them. First, I want access to all your father's records. Second, I get my own room. And third, if you ever treat me like some charity case again, I'm out. A faint smile tugged at Damien's lips, something that rarely happened. Deal. As they shook hands in the amber light of the safe house, neither of them realized that their improbable arrangement was about to turn their worlds completely upside down. Outside, thunder rolled across the river like distant artillery, and in its echo, both could hear the sound of their old lives ending and something far more dangerous beginning. Eleanor Cross's voice crackled through the small speaker. Crisp and commanding, even through the static. The Reeves problem needs to disappear tonight, Vincent. My son's future depends on keeping this buried. Consider it handled, Mrs. Cross. Just like his father. Recording ended, leaving only the sound of rain against the windows and Sophia's ragged breathing. Damien stared at the device as if it might spontaneously combust, his world rewriting itself in real time. His father, Sophia whispered. They killed my father, too. The pieces crashed together in Damien's mind with sickening clarity. James Reeves, the construction worker who died in an industrial accident 5 years ago. The man who'd been asking too many questions about safety violations and missing building materials. Damien remembered the incident because his father had been unusually tense for weeks afterward. Sophia, he reached for her hand, but she pulled away, wrapping her arms around herself. 15 years, she said, her voice hollow. 15 years I thought my father died because some foreman cut corners on safety equipment. I blamed myself. For not being there, for not somehow preventing it. She looked at him with eyes that held no forgiveness. Your family murdered him because he wouldn't stay quiet about their crimes. The weight of inherited guilt settled on Damien's shoulders like a lead blanket. I didn't know. But you suspected something, didn't you? She moved to the window again, putting distance between them. All those charitable donations, all that Public philanthropy. You were trying to balance the scales. Damien's phone rang. His mother's name flashed on the screen. Darling, I hope you're prepared for tomorrow's dinner. The Piermont family represents everything our family stands for. Actually, Mother, I have news that might change your plans. Damien kept his voice level, professional. I got married. When Eleanor spoke again, her voice could have cut diamond. Excuse me. Her name is Sophia. We eloped this afternoon. He glanced at Sophia, who had turned from the window to stare at him in shock. I'll be bringing her to dinner tomorrow to meet the family. Damien Harold Cross, you will explain yourself this instant. He ended the call and immediately turned off the phone. Sophia crossed her arms. What the hell was that?
Oh.
Insurance, Damien replied. It buys us time. Time for what? To bring them down properly. Move to a hidden panel in the wall, revealing a sophisticated computer setup. My father kept digital records of everything. If the corruption goes as deep as that recording suggests, there will be evidence. Sophia joined him at the desk, her shoulder brushing his as she leaned over to examine the screens. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through him, and he found himself studying the curve of her neck. The way her hair caught the blue glow of the monitors. Focus, she said, without looking at him. But there was something different in her voice. What are we looking for? They worked in tense silence for hours, following digital breadcrumbs through layers of encrypted files and coded transactions. What they found was worse than either had imagined. Cross Industries wasn't just involved in money laundering. Jesus, Sophia breathed, staring at a file labeled Cleanup Protocols. They have a list, names, addresses, methods. The notation beside it read, Contingency only, Mother's discretion. She was prepared to have me killed, he said, the words tasting like ash. Sophia's hand found his, her fingers intertwining with his. We both lost our families long before we knew it. The gesture was meant to comfort, but the warmth of her touch ignited something in Damien that felt dangerous. He turned to face her, and the space between them seemed to crackle with electricity. Sophia, he began, but she stepped closer, her eyes searching his face. I know this is insane, she whispered, but right now you're the only person in the world I trust. Oh. Before either could think better of it, she kissed him. It wasn't soft or romantic. It was desperate and fierce, tasting of shared trauma and dangerous possibilities. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. This complicates things, Damien said, his forehead resting against hers. Everything's already complicated. Besides, if we're going to convince your family we're married, we should probably look like we can stand being in the same room. They were so absorbed in each other that neither noticed the red light blinking on the security monitor, indicating that someone had just breached the perimeter of the safe house. The Kensington Estates dining room gleamed under the light of 3 crystal chandeliers, each one worth more than most people's houses. Sophia sat beside Damien at the mahogany table, her spine straight and her smile perfectly practiced. Wore a midnight blue dress he'd bought her that morning, and the transformation was startling. Gone was the desperate woman who'd fled through traffic. In her place sat someone who looked like she belonged in this world of old money and older secrets. Eleanor Cross studied her new daughter-in-law with the intensity of a hawk examining. Pray, Sophia, dear, you mentioned you dabble in several areas. How wonderfully vague. I prefer to think of it as versatile, Sophia replied, her tone matching Eleanor's false sweetness perfectly. I've done event planning, freelance writing, some consulting work. Consulting? Charles Cross spoke for the first time that evening, his voice a gravelly rumble. In what field? Sophia's fingers found Damien's under the table, a gesture that looked affectionate but felt like an anchor. Financial analysis. Actually, pattern recognition, fraud detection, have a talent for seeing connections others miss. The temperature in the room dropped perceptibly. Isabella Piermont, who'd been sulking since their arrival, suddenly sat forward. How fascinating. Perhaps you could examine our family's books sometime. Isabella Eleanor's voice carried a warning sharp as broken glass. I'd be delighted, Sophia said, her smile never wavering. I find family financial histories absolutely riveting. Damien felt the conversation teetering on a knife's edge. These people had killed for less than what Sophia was implying. Perhaps we should discuss something else. Nonsense, Eleanor said, setting down her wine glass with deliberate precision. I'm quite interested in learning more about my son's wife. Tell me, Sophia, how exactly did you two meet? The question hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Sophia looked at Damien, and something passed between them. A moment of perfect understanding. I rear-ended his car, Sophia said with a laugh that sounded entirely genuine. Completely destroyed his bumper. Was furious until he realized I had no insurance and no money to pay for repairs. How romantic, Isabella muttered. It was, actually, Damien said, surprising himself with how icily the lie came. She offered to work off the debt by organizing my office. 3 months later, I realized I couldn't imagine my life without her chaos. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. How wonderfully spontaneous. And when exactly was this wedding? Yesterday, Sophia said quickly. We flew to Vegas. It was very Elvis-themed. The conversation continued its deadly dance through the main course, each question from Eleanor more pointed than the last. But Sophia parried every probe with increasing skill, weaving a backstory that was just detailed enough to be believable and just vague enough to avoid contradiction. It wasn't until dessert that everything went wrong. Eleanor's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her face transformed into something predatory. How interesting. I just received a very enlightening photograph. Okay. She turned the phone to face. Them on the screen was a security camera image of Sophia entering the FBI field office 3 hours before she'd thrown herself into Damien's car. The room fell silent, except for the tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. Sophia's hand went limp in Damien's, and he felt something cold and terrible settle in his stomach. Special Agent Sophia Reeves, Eleanor said, her voice dripping. Poison. Undercover Financial Crimes Division. My dear, you're quite good at this game, but I've been playing it much longer. Sophia lifted her chin, the mask finally falling away to reveal the federal agent underneath. Mrs. Cross, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, money laundering, and racketeering. Eleanor laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. With what evidence? That little recording device you're wearing? I'm afraid we've been jamming electronic signals since you arrived. Damien turned to stare at Sophia, betrayal and admiration warring in his chest. You're FBI. I'm sorry, she said, and the anguish in her voice sounded real. I never meant for it to go this far. The brother who was killed was real. Michael Reeves was my partner, not my brother. But everything else I felt, everything between us, that was real too. Eleanor stood, smoothing her dress. Vincent, would you please escort our guest to the wine cellar? I believe she'd be more comfortable there while we decide what to do with her. The man who'd been standing silently in the corner stepped forward, and Sophia recognized him from the hotel. Vincent Castellano's smile was arctic. Actually, a new voice said from the doorway, I think Agent Reeves is quite comfortable where she is. Marcus, Damien's driver, stepped into the room, but he moved. Differently now, with the controlled precision of law enforcement. Behind him came 6 FBI agents in tactical gear. Special Agent Marcus Torres, Financial Crimes Division, he announced, his weapon drawn but lowered. Eleanor Cross, Charles Cross, you're under arrest. Eleanor's composure cracked for the first time in decades. Damien, you brought the FBI into our home? But Damien was staring at Sophia, understanding flooding through him like ice water. The safe house. You knew I'd take you there. You knew I'd access my father's files. You needed someone on the inside, Sophia said quietly. Someone who could access Harold Cross's records without triggering security protocols. So everything was a lie. Not everything. She stood, her eyes never leaving his face. I thought it would be. I thought you'd be just another entitled, rich boy who'd never faced consequences for his family's crimes. But you're not who I expected you to be. Neither are you. As the FBI led his parents away in handcuffs, Damien remained seated at the family table. The weight of 3 generations of corruption finally lifted from his shoulders. Sophia lingered in the doorway, looking back at him with something that might have been regret. "It's a recording device in your dress," he said suddenly. "It wasn't jammed, was it?" She shook her head. "Your mother was right about one thing. I'm good at this game." She walked away with the other agents. Damien found himself alone in the mansion that had been his prison for 34 years. Finally free, but more isolated than he'd ever been in his life. 6 months later, Damien stood in the witness box of the federal courthouse, his voice steady as he testified against the only family he'd ever known. The courtroom was packed with reporters and curiosity seekers, all waiting to watch the final act of the Cross family drama. Eleanor sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit that seemed to diminish her somehow, her perfectly styled hair replaced by graying roots and tired eyes. She hadn't looked at him once during the 3-day trial. "Mr. Cross," the prosecutor continued, "you're testifying that your mother specifically ordered the murders of Michael Reeves and James Reeves to protect the family's criminal enterprise?" "Yes, even though this testimony will result in your own financial ruin and potential criminal charges." Damien's eyes found Sophia in the gallery. She sat in the back row, her federal credentials having earned her a seat despite being a key witness. She wore a simple gray suit and no makeup, but she was still the most beautiful thing in the room. "Yes," the prosecutor nodded. No further questions. As Damien left the witness stand, he walked past his mother for the first time in months. She finally looked up, and her eyes held no anger, only a cold disappointment that cut deeper than rage. "You've no idea what you've destroyed," she whispered. "I know exactly what I've destroyed," he replied. "The question is whether it was worth saving." The trial concluded 2 days later with guilty verdicts on all counts. Eleanor received life without parole. Charles got 25 years. Castellano had already been found dead in his cell, an apparent suicide that fooled no one. Damien walked out of the courthouse into a crowd of reporters and photographers, their questions hitting him like physical blows. He pushed through them without responding, focused only on reaching the black sedan waiting at the curb. Sophia leaned against the car, and for a moment they just looked at each other across the chaos of the media circus. "It's over," she said. When he reached her, "Is it?" She studied his face, noting the shadows under his eyes, the way grief and relief warred in his expression. "The case is closed. Your family's network is dismantled. Free, bankrupt, and unemployable. And probably looking at my own criminal charges within the year. The immunity deal will hold. You'll be fine, will I?" The question hung between them, loaded with everything they'd shared and everything they'd lost. Sophia looked away first. "I should go. A new assignment starts Monday. Where does it matter?" Damien reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "I have something for you." Inside was a deed to a small house in Vermont, surrounded by mountains and far from the reach of family legacies and federal investigations. Attached was a note in Damien's careful handwriting. "For someone who understands the weight of justice." "I can't accept this. It's not from me," he said quietly. "It's from Michael. Liquidated what was left of my personal assets and made a donation to the Michael Reeves Foundation for Financial Crime Victims. The house was purchased by the foundation. You're just the first recipient." Tears gathered in Sophia's eyes, the first ones he'd seen from her since that night in the safe. House. He would have liked that. "I hope so." She looked down at the deed, then back at him. "What will you do now?" "I don't know. For the first time in my life, I get to find out who I am when I'm not trying to live up to or live down my father's name. That's terrifying." "Terrifying," he agreed. "And liberating." A car honked behind them. Sophia's FBI handler was waiting to drive her to the airport. She hesitated, then stepped closer to Damien. "For what it's worth," she said, "I never lied about what I felt. That part was real. I know." She kissed his cheek, a whisper of warmth in the cold afternoon air. "Maybe someday, when we're both different people, we'll find each other again." "Maybe we will." Sophia walked away and Damien watched until she disappeared into the government sedan. He stood on the courthouse steps for a long time after that, feeling the weight of his choices and the strange lightness of having nothing left to lose. His phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. Saw the trial on the news. Coffee shop. On 5th and Pine. Needs a new bookkeeper. No questions asked. Friend. Damien looked up at the gray sky, where snow had begun to fall like ash from a burned life. He thought about Sophia driving toward whatever new assignment awaited her, carrying his father's victims' names in her heart like prayer beads. Then he put the phone away and walked into the crowd, ready to discover who Damien Cross could become when he was no longer Harold Cross's son. 5 years later, in a small coffee shop in Vermont, a man with calloused hands and kind eyes would look up from his ledger books to see a woman with green eyes and graying temples walk through the door. She would order a latte and a blueberry muffin, and they would talk about the weather and the changing leaves and everything except the past that had brought them together and torn them apart. But that would be a different story entirely. Asterisk comment. Below, would you choose love or justice? Let us know what you would do. Smash that like button if this story gave you chills. Subscribe and hit the bell for more incredible true stories. Share with someone who loves plot twists. The end.